Let's bring in columnist and associate editor for the Washington Post, David Ignatius.
Well, David, you have official Washington talking, certainly the White House talking. Your latest opinion piece in the Washington Post also has my wife talking, David, and I don't know that you'd like to hear what she has to say, but you may. Go ahead,
The
Nika.
piece is entitled, President Biden Should Not Run Again in 2024. And in it, you write, quote, Biden wrote his political testament in his inaugural address. When our days are through, our children and our children's children will say of us, they gave their best. They did their duty. They healed a broken land. Mr. President, maybe this is that moment when duty has been served. Biden would carry two big liabilities into a 2024 campaign. He would be 82 when he began a second term. And according to a recent Associated Press and ORC poll, 77% of the public think he is too old to be effective for 4 more years. Because of their concerns about Biden's age, voters would sensibly focus on his presumptive running mate, Kamala Harris. She is less popular than Biden, with a 39.5% approval rating. According to polling website 538, Harris has many laudable qualities, but the simple fact is that she has failed to gain traction in the country or even within her own party. I hope Biden has this conversation with himself about whether to run and that he levels with the country about it. It would focus the 2024 campaign. Who is the best person to stop Trump? That was the question when Biden decided to run in 2019, and it's still the essential test of a Democratic nominee today. So, David, what are you really saying here? Because if you look at Biden's track record and the fact that he has beaten Trump, I don't know why you would question his ability to beat him again. There are other presidents who are later in years, including the Republican presumptive nominee. Is this really about Kamala Harris?
So, Mika, you summarized my argument, what led me to write this piece, just right. I admire many things that President Biden has done in domestic and foreign policy. I do think that that legacy, and at the center of his legacy, is the fact that he stopped Trump. He stopped him in 2020. He stopped Trump supporters in the midterm elections. He's mobilized the Justice Department that is now bringing Trump to accountability. I worry that all those achievements are at risk. And it seemed to me through this summer, I haven't gone anywhere in the country, I haven't talked to any group of people where this issue of whether President Biden should run again hasn't been a centerpiece of conversation. It doesn't get into the newspapers. It doesn't get much on TV except Fox News, which is obsessed with it. And I thought that it was time to raise that question. Again, the heart of it is whether Joe Biden is the best person to carry this legacy forward. He may decide that he's the only person who can defeat Donald Trump. I mean, he sees that as his mission. That's why he ran in the first place back in 2019. He may decide he's the guy who can do it and nobody else can, and that's his decision. But I felt it was time to have a more public discussion about this. It is, as I say, something I'd be surprised if you and Joe and the people you talk with are not discussing it in private. Certainly, I find everywhere I go, it's a subject. And what journalists like me should do is take issues like that people are talking about in private and bring them forward so we can have a better discussion. So that's a simple explanation.
I want to tap into your expertise, though, because you write a column that is, extremely, I think, in a way, it's a very, very strong message for you, David Ignatius, to write this column. And you have spent much of your career spending time writing about or writing with the greatest strategic thinkers of our time on world affairs, on foreign policy. And when you look at what Joe Biden has done with NATO and the war in Ukraine, and in terms of galvanizing, putting this country back on a track to lead on the world stage? Who would be an alternative right now who could do that on day one, a legitimate one?
So, Mika, I can't name you that person. The thing about the democratic process is that it yields answers to questions like that through this amazing phenomenon I still believe in. I believe that open discussion, that nominating campaigns produce clarity, produce candidates, produce leaders. I couldn't agree more that Biden has been a strong leader in foreign policy and in domestic policy, as I wrote in the column. He has passed some of the most significant domestic social legislation in decades. In foreign policy, one of the things that I admire most about Biden is that he's gathered a team around him of very solid people who think strategically. He is the leader of that team, but the team members themselves are strong. I have no doubt that this team of sensible, strategic people in the Democratic Party who are driving foreign policy forward in a good way will continue, no matter who the Democrats choose. So on that score, I'm less concerned than you are. I think it comes down to what we were talking about earlier. Is Joe Biden the person who can stop Donald Trump or somebody like Trump who gets the Republican nomination? That's what he's got. He's got to look in the mirror, search his soul, and make that decision. And I wanted to raise that question. I'd like him to think that through carefully, because I have my concerns.
Well, and Willie, just to answer David's question, Mika and I, everybody we talk to, every political discussion, it talks a lot about Trump, but when it comes to Joe Biden, people say, man, he's too old to run, isn't he? I mean, he's not really going to run. When I say every discussion, I don't mean 99% of the discussions. Every discussion. We got it. I asked Reverend Al if he was hearing it all the time on our show this past week. He's hearing it as well. So, you know, we often will complain about Republicans who will say one thing about Donald Trump off the air and another on air. Well, let me just say, Democrats off the air will say Joe Biden's too old. Why is he running? On the air, they won't say that. So I commend David for at least raising the question. I mean, my question, of course, Willie, is who can do a better job as president as Joe Biden, and who can beat Donald Trump? I don't see a lot of Democrats out there. I don't see any Democrats out there right now that could do that.
Well, that is, both of those points are exactly right, which is every conversation about politics, whether you're with Democrats or Republicans, it's about Donald Trump, and it's about, boy, Joe Biden does look old. He's about to be 81 this fall. He'll be 82 a couple of weeks after the election next year. That is a real conversation that's happening. And when they see him sometimes at public events, they might even cringe a little bit and want to look away and not watch that. And then the other part of it, though, is the important question that you're asking and that Mika's asking, which is, OK, if not him, who? And I think where a lot of people land, Claire McCaskill, Democrats, is he the guy who can beat Donald Trump? Well, he did once. He already beat him a couple of years ago. So of all the people they're looking at on whatever this sort of fantasy menu of candidates on the Democratic side is, they say, yeah, he might be a little bit old, but I'm going to vote for him because I don't want the guy who tried to lead a coup against the United States government to be president again.
Yeah, listen, I think that the bottom line is we've got a lot of strong leaders in this country that are older than Joe Biden. Bernie Sanders is older than Joe Biden. Rupert Murdoch is older than Joe Biden. Warren Buffett is older than Joe Biden. So the issue is, who does Joe Biden think can beat Trump? He is 100% convinced it's him. He is 100% convinced that he is the best one. And if you can't move him off 100%, he's going to be our nominee. And I don't have the confidence that David Ignatius has in the nominating process, because the nominating process is actually what brought us Donald Trump and is going to bring us Donald Trump again. So it's flawed. It's not a perfect process. But I want to talk to you, David, about Kamala Harris. I've started a little exercise. Every time somebody says something negative to me about Kamala Harris, I go, well, what is it specifically about her you don't like? What has she done that is so offensive to you? And you know I get blah, blah, blah. Nobody has an answer. So I'd love you to spend some time on the Kamala Harris issue, and I'm looking forward to your column on that. Why is America down on her to the extent they are? Because she has done nothing to deserve this. Every vice president is considered kind of an asterisk. I remember us laughing sometimes at Joe Biden when he was vice president in the cloakroom of the Senate. I mean, I wasn't laughing, sorry, Mr. President, but other people were kind of making fun of him. Al Gore, same thing. Dan Quayle, same thing. Vice presidents have a tough job. But why is America so convinced this? I mean, this is a woman of great accomplishment. She has done things in a very competitive environment in the Democratic Party in California that many politicians could never accomplish. So I'd love you to tackle that. Why is this Kamala Harris a problem instead of an asset? I don't get it.
So I think it is it's a riddle. It's one that I and other people should write more about. She is a person of enormous talent, as I said in the column this morning. It's the same question now as it was during the primaries back in 2020 to me. I expected her to be a stronger candidate than she was. Why she didn't get traction with the public, with Democratic voters, I don't know. But I watched that happen. And I feel as if I'm watching that happen now when she's vice president. I'd love for her to get that feel that good politicians have with the public to, as I say, have traction, that become known, become a familiar person, somebody who's a plausible leader, a plausible president, who say, yeah, I'm comfortable with that. Something should happen to Joe Biden, I'm comfortable with that. And I think that's the challenge that she's faced. And I don't know many political observers, Claire, maybe you disagree, who feel that she's really accomplished that. Maybe it's still possible, but I think that has not been an easy job for her. Maybe the White House has obstructed her. So many questions you could ask here, but I think that's the core. That poll numbers reinforce this, but it's as much talking to Democrats. Again, I think this is a conversation that you have around every dinner table among people who follow politics closely, but it doesn't surface all that often in our public conversations, and it should. Making decisions about our political leadership is something we as a country should do. It shouldn't be private, not talked about, and so I think you're right. We ought to ask, well, can she become a better, stronger leader? How do we look at her differently? I think those are all good questions to ask.
So is your column does it have a dual message, questioning whether Joe Biden should replace his running mate, and if not Joe Biden, if you think he should consider not running again, who is the alternative?
So I'm just not prepared to say. I wish I knew who the alternative is. What I said is that this combination of Joe Biden at the top of the ticket, and the polls show people feel uneasy about somebody who's 82 serving another 4-year term. That the combination of that and people's uneasiness is reflected in polls about the vice president succeeding him, which you have to think about carefully with somebody who's going to be in his mid-80s. That combination seems to me to be potentially dangerous for the Democrats in fending off what would be a disaster, a revenge presidency by Donald Trump. And I felt it was important to have more of a discussion about that. I think the point that everybody's made, in the end, this is going to be Joe Biden's decision. If he decides, I am the person and I'm going to do it, then it's going to happen. Does he decide that he wants to stick with Kamala Harris? Probably. He's made that pretty clear in the past. But I think raising the question now, time is running out. In another month, it's going to be too late to have this conversation. So I thought before it was locked in stone, it was worth at least raising.
I can't think of ever a moment I've disagreed with the Washington Post David Ignatius.
You love him.
As I do right now. David Ignatius, thank you for being on. David Ignatius, by the way, who has a father who is feisty and as with it as it comes at
102. Thank you for mentioning him. He's watching this morning, so he'll be pleased.
Good on ya. All right. Thank you, David.